Now, across Texas, the issue is.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin. Stephen Dial has the day off.
I'm Greg Krugen in Houston, and this is Texas, the issue is.
Sure is. Our issue up for discussion is a wild card play in the campaign for Lieutenant Governor. Austin Democrat Vikki Goodwin was almost immediately dismissed as a long shot when she announced her campaign for the party's nomination. But now she seems to be trying to turn the tables. Goodwin says if casino resorts and online sports betting ever get a statewide ballot vote and win that statewide ballot vote, she would support those issues. By taking that position, she could be making next year's general election face-off with Republican incumbent Dan Patrick a de facto referendum on gambling.
Well, I think that we should allow personal freedom, personal responsibility in the state of Texas, and I have been hearing that some people do want casinos to come to Texas. You know, I have friends who leave the state to go to Las Vegas, to Louisiana, et cetera, and they say, why can't we have it here in Texas? It seems like a recent survey showed that over 50% of Texans do gamble already, and so why don't we allow them to vote, to have a say?
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has pretty much set it in stone, no casino gambling, doesn't even like the lottery. Does this provide separation for you?
Well, I think the separation is that oftentimes the Lieutenant Governor thinks he knows best for Texans, and yet I think that we should let Texans have a say on many issues, not just casino gambling, but THC, school vouchers.
Isn't that kind of like punting the can to the voters, though, on the big issues? That's what you're hired to do, is make those big choices, though.
Right, but what we've seen is that in the Senate and sometimes even in the House, the members are not, they're falling in line. They're following the leader, what he wants, or as opposed to listening to their constituents, in my opinion.
The last time that this issue came up and was pitched, we had destination resort casinos and only a select cities being involved. Do you like that idea, or do you want something more broad?
I would like something more broad. I don't think that we should pick when we're deciding if we're going to allow casinos where they're going to go and who's going to run them. I think that we should have more of a deliberative conversation about how that happens.
Is this a way for you to kind of reach out to the moderate, to the independent voters to say, you have a place with me?
I mean, certainly I want to reach out to moderate and independent-minded voters, but I think people of all stripes are interested in casino gambling.
You mentioned other issues that you'd like to see go to maybe a public vote, that being issues dealing with hemp products with THC and marijuana. Where do you stand with what the governor did with his executive order?
I believe in separation of powers. You know, he's in the executive office. This should be handled legislatively, in my opinion.
How far should the legislature go with this issue? Does it go total legalization with marijuana, in your mind?
Well, like I said, I think we need to have regulation around it. Legalization with some regulation.
What are the other issues Vikki Goodwin wants to get out there to say, here's the separation, here's the apple, here's the orange?
Well, school vouchers would be one really big issue.
Are you worried some of the social issues could hurt you, or is this a way for you to say, I can still reach out to the moderates?
Look, social issues are important because I care about all people, but I don't think that should overshadow some of the bigger issues of like I said, public education and healthcare access and water and housing affordability. It doesn't matter what your belief system is, you care about the basics of having a good job, being able to pay for things, affordability, that impacts everybody.
If you're able to win this job, how do you manage a chamber that most likely will stay Republican controlled?
It will have a very different temperature in the Senate. You know, it will be more deliberative, more democratic. I will listen to senators in their opinions, and we will have debate. Right now, I feel like the attitude of the Lieutenant Governor is it's his way or the highway.
All right, my word for that is shuffle, as in that position could probably reshuffle the deck for the general election. Bill King, you're sitting in for Stephen Dial. What's your word for that?
I would say misinterpretation.
All right, Greg, give me a word.
Rudy, my word is lottery, as in Goodwin has about the same chance of winning it as she does prevailing over Dan Patrick statewide.
All right. With that, we will take it to a break and then come back to discuss Goodwin's political wild card. All right, welcome back to Texas. The issue is political commentator Bill King sitting in for Stephen Dial. We're discussing how Democrat Vikki Goodwin is trying to reshuffle the deck in her challenge to unseat Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Greg, a poll back in February showed strong support for legalizing destination casino resorts. What are you hearing about Goodwin's play?
Well, not a lot about Goodwin, who frankly no one knows from Adam here in Houston, no offense intended. That said, I'm pretty confident a majority of voters here are more than open to casino gambling, including my brother-in-law, who makes the run to Louisiana twice a month to roll the dice legally. Now, hitching your little-known candidacy to popular issues like legalizing casinos and marijuana is, in my estimation, a pretty smart play when you desperately need to build name ID and draw some media coverage. Will it be enough to dislodge a well-known three-term Republican incumbent with an enormous political war chest and loud support from Donald Trump in a consistently red state which hasn't elected a Democrat statewide since 1994? No, I'm not willing to put a dime on that. Although, like the lottery, lightning can strike, as in a once obscure 26-year-old named Lena Hidalgo, who came out of absolutely nowhere to become chief executive of the third largest county in this nation. It can happen. Rudy?
That's right. Yeah, keep that wild card in thought. Those were some really good points. Goodwin's bid for lieutenant governor does come with some hard left political baggage. Her stance on polarizing issues like gender identity, abortion may be a hard sell for some moderates and independent voters. But I think some supporting public votes on gambling and marijuana could be a great political sleight of hand. Bill, is it enough of a distraction from her voting record? What do you think?
I don't think it's going to be. I use the word overinterpretation because I think when Democrats look at these issues and they see, and there's a long list of them where the current state leadership is out of step with the majority of Texans, but they're just not things that they care about all that much, and they're not things that they're likely to go actually cast their vote because of that. There was a UT poll before the special session that said, what are the most important issues? Number one was doing something about Central Texas flooding, and the second thing was property taxes, and everything else was in single digits. So when you get down to like abortion and casino gambling, it's like 1 or 2% of the people think that's a really important issue. So trying to string those things together becomes very difficult, especially when you don't have a big war chest to send that message out.
You know, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick chairs President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission, so the odds are low for a Patrick pivot on gambling and marijuana. Greg, there are a lot of church-going Democrats, though, that don't like gambling, so couldn't that factor into this in November?
Rudy, hard to say. As we've consistently said here, for any Texas Democrat to win statewide in 2026, the Texas economy pretty much has to be in the toilet. Will Democrats who make the effort to vote actually penalize Goodwin for advocating statewide referendums on gambling and weed legalization? I kind of doubt it. I think her best opportunity to accumulate votes is among independents who pick and choose from both sides of the political ledger and who may be turned off by what they view as Patrick's moral extremism. Couple that with a single issue voters fired up by the prospect of legal gambling or marijuana, and Goodwin can make some noise, although actually winning is the longest of long shots, Rudy.
All right, Bill, real quickly, could the wild card, though, in all this going into November be the Charlie Kirk assassination and the anger over that? What does your crystal ball say?
I don't think so. These shooting incidents and assassinations tend to pass pretty quickly. I don't think that'll really be the issues. And there's some things that, for example, she was talking about school vouchers. School vouchers actually poll very, very well. So there's going to be some things that Patrick can use to target her, and he's going to have the money to do it. She's not going to have the money to respond.
All right, we'll end it with that.
Up next, another Texas House member is also launching a new campaign for higher office. Republican Briscoe Cain talks about his bid for a congressional district when we come back. Exit interview. If a truly unvarnished take is what you seek, it's best to talk to office holders as they slide onto the off-ramp and have fewer worries about stepping on the political toes of friends or foes. And that's one reason I sat down with State Representative Briscoe Cain, the Deer Park Republican who's been in the thick of legislative fights for a decade and is looking to exit the lower chamber for a seat in Congress. State Representative Briscoe Cain, good to see you again.
Howdy, Greg.
All right, a full regular, 2 specials. You've always kind of been a truth teller. Give me your assessment.
This legislative session was better than previous sessions, but certainly we left a lot on the field. There was a massive movement to end taxpayer-funded lobbying, which $100 million this year alone has gone from local governments to hire lobbyists, and I can assure you they're not there lobbying the legislature on your behalf. So those are some failures, but there were a lot of victories. We put a lot of money towards the border, and we've made some great investments in our education system. I'd say school choice is probably one of the great accomplishments that came out of it that will forever, I believe, change Texas public schools. I'm a product of a great public school system in Deer Park, Texas. They perform well, and so people there may not use it, but there are places that underperform, and parents are the most important factor in a child's education, and I believe this system is going to empower parents and put them in the driver's seat.
One of the things that didn't get accomplished was some type of decision on the future of over-the-counter THC. How did you come down on that, and where are we at? Where should we be?
It's that a majority of Texans did not want a ban. They wanted some form of, I don't know, kind of a reasonable regulation, something to keep it out of the hands of children, not to allow it to be in gas stations, to get rid of the synthetic stuff. Essentially a regulatory climate kind of like alcohol, something to get rid of the cartel, to not have a black market, to allow adults to make decisions and do what they want. And frankly, I'm not sure why we weren't able to do that. I do think there may be a third called session. Not that I want one. I don't exactly want to be up there, but there may be another one.
The abortion pill, so-called abortion pill, has been made to be, if not illegal, certainly unwelcome in the state of Texas.
We set up a scheme whereby private citizens, Texans, can bring litigation against anybody trying to mail these dangerous abortifacients into Texas. We also did great things on protecting the innocence of children, allowing you to bring litigation against public schools who are hiding and protecting child predators. Something you're already allowed to do in private schools. We just thought we should be able to get rid of them in our public schools as well. We also did things on getting perverted books out of the classroom. Really simple things, okay? Like common sense. Adult books have to be in the adult section. Why anyone fought this is beyond me.
You spoke earlier about what I like to call the 90-10 or 80-20 issues, and one of those is biological males in women's restrooms.
The legislation that we passed prohibits those entities on government property from allowing men into women's private spaces, whether it's their gym, locker room, showers, etc. And it ensures that they comply with very stiff penalties, like $25,000 for the first time, up to $125,000 in penalties if they don't follow the rules set by Texas. One of the reasons we started having to put these penalties in it is the legislature was passing laws, and then there was no way to force these governments to comply. Because they kept ignoring our laws, we had to take those matters into our hands.
Look, I'd like to get your assessment of the performance of Speaker Dustin Burrows. There were naysayers going into the session. Your assessment?
And I can tell you, as someone who's been there through, I guess he's my 4th speaker now, he is to the right of everyone before him. The results of this legislative session were to the right of everyone before him. Of course, we had a large group of freshmen come in, firebrand reformers that I was excited to bring in new ranks and work with to move the Overton window for Republicans here in the legislature. But Speaker Burrows certainly performed very well, and I expect him to be handedly reelected as Speaker next session.
Okay, gentlemen, Briscoe Cain just talked about the Overton window and how conservative ideas once considered out of the mainstream are becoming public policy in Texas, many with broad majority support. Stuff like barring trans folk from women's restrooms and keeping books with adult sexual themes out of school libraries, harsh restrictions on the abortion pill. I could go on. Bill, you've talked about our state's growing reputation for what some see as conservative extremism, attracting some to Texas, but also repelling others from moving here.
Yeah, so last year, the number of people that moved into Texas, the net number was 85,000. That was down 2/3 from the year before, and it's about half the 10-year average. So there is some brand damage being done. You know, the University of Texas has been running this poll since 2010, where it asked Texans, do you think that the Texas state government is a good model for other states to follow? Back in 2010, it was a +26 agreed with that. Today, it's a -6 that agrees with it. The problem is that you've got to beat somebody with somebody, and as long as Democrats are out there talking about transgender and being against school voucher and some of these things are very popular, they're just not a credible alternative.
All right, Rudy, Cain's view on the future of THC in Texas is emblematic of the rift among Republicans on the issue. He clearly agrees with the governor's call for regulation versus Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's insistence on a total ban. My guess is Briscoe's view has more support among conservatives than the lieutenant governor can crush. Thoughts on that?
That's an interesting thought, Greg. Right now, it's a little hard for me to get a read on this new congressional candidate, Briscoe Cain. You know, when he first arrived on the Texas House floor back in 2016, I saw how some of the older GOP lawmakers would just literally roll their eyes whenever he got up to speak and do something. And in a way, they still do that. Cain then and now, you know, it's important to note, never afraid to toss a few verbal hand grenades, regardless of party affiliation. So he's, burnt some bridges with some members of the GOP. And some will remember he got put into the Twitter doghouse back in 2019 for posting, "My AR is ready for you," and that in response to Beto O'Rourke's comment about coming for guns. And 2017, Texas Monthly, not exactly a conservative magazine, but nonetheless a big magazine, pegged him as one of the worst legislators under the Capitol Dome, calling him uninformed and belligerent. But his position on the Abbott hemp order, that may reflect some political maturity on his part. And this new congressional district that he's running in. Remember, this new 9 is not the old 9 that Al Green has, which was deep, dark blue. But it is doing a little bit of a shift that may not exactly be Dan Patrick hard red either, which is why Cain may be adjusting and sounding a little bit more libertarian in regards to at least the hemp products than otherwise. Greg?
All right, Bill, you communicate regularly with that huge swath of Texans who identify as independents, all of whom have watched the hard right drift of the Texas legislature for multiple sessions now. Are you sensing any substantial groundswell of concern among moderate pragmatists that laws and restrictions have become too radical?
Oh, look, for as long as I've been voting, practically, moderates, independents like myself, have had to go into the polls and pick the lesser of two evils. I mean, that's still basically what we have to do. But right now, I just don't see, and by the way, independents break about 2-1 for Republicans in Texas in elections. And I think it's just because the Democratic messaging is so weak and so out of touch with what people really care about. I mean, they're up there defending higher property taxes opposed to these caps. I don't know why they can't figure out what the issues are that could actually get them elected.
All right, Rudy, take us to break.
Yeah, good points by Bill there. But we still have some other issues to deal with, some issues that maybe didn't make the really big headlines, but are important. So we'll take those up right after this break. Okay, welcome back. This is our Wildcard segment where we close out with some other issues from the week that may have piqued our interest. And for me, I'm going to talk about Governor Greg Abbott and how he signed legislation to beef up the VOTEC programs all across the state of Texas. Now, a lot of school districts are really doing some amazing work in the VOTEC and career. You don't have to go to college. You can get some really good jobs doing this. But the one thing that I think that state lawmakers, and the issue that I think state lawmakers need to be thinking about, is something that's basic. Civics, learning how to type again. Those are some really basic things that right now kids in high school, they just don't get. They can't work a freaking keyboard. That just is mind-boggling to me. So let's get back to some basic civics and some basic, things like typing, bring back typing class. And you know what? Bring back driver's ed into high school. Let's get some real kids behind the wheels, again, driving the cars. I remember the day that I wanted to drive all the time. And, you know, it started to change when we moved driver's ed out of high school. That's my point. Bill, give me your issue.
So, in the last 2 years, Texas has heavily relied on international immigration to keep its population numbers up. We're one of the fastest growing states, but about 2/3 of that growth has come from international immigration. We have some numbers from several groups, the American Immigration Studies Group and the Pew Foundation, that suggest that there are a very large number of people leaving the United States right now. ACI said something like 2.2. Pew said about 1.6 million. If that's the case, those people are largely going to be coming from Florida, Texas, and California. Those are very dramatic population changes that will have a lot of consequences in this state if they're true.
All right, Greg, what's your issue?
Oh, something really important, Rudy. My issue is something that has become incredibly important in my world and something that I have absolutely no control over, and that is the success or failure of the Houston Astros. Following this team from the very first pitch this spring has been nothing short of an emotional roller coaster of extremes. Despite an astonishing 20 different players injured, some twice, the Astros are in the thick of a pennant race, due in no small part to an unlikely cast of replacements that Bill's wife Cheryl lovingly calls the Sandlot Kids. Bottom line, win or lose, it's been one hell of a ride, with this week's sweep of the Texas Strangers generating a genuinely warm feeling that I'm still savoring. All right. I'm going to have to leave it there. That's all the time we have. You can see the interview or any of our past interviews by going to our YouTube pages, and keep the conversation going on social media.
Next week, Stephen Dobb will be back to help us take on the issues of that week. And don't forget, let us know what you think the issue is.